GLOBIS.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and let me thank the panelists. As you can see, our problem today is we have an embarrassment of riches. So we have to be pretty clear about giving everybody plenty of time to talk, which we'll do to start. Everyone will give a few minutes chat. Then we'll have a few topics between us we'll discuss, and then hopefully have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So without further ado, let me just get started. We're going to start from macro and then go down to micro. So to start out that, Kathy, if you could help us out, you're, I think, the inventor of the term Womenomics. So perhaps you're the best one to start out today.
I guess so. So very nice to be here. Thank you to GLOBIS and the team at G1 for inviting me. In terms of just sort of top-down, big picture comments that I'll make just to start off the conversation. First off, there has been a lot of work done in looking at what I call gender gap in entrepreneurship around the world. And I know that Miki Tsusaka is right here from BCG, but BCG, if you haven't seen the study, I think it is one of the most comprehensive studies out there looking at the impact that closing that gender gap in entrepreneurship could do to the global economy. And I believe their analysis suggests that if you could close this gap, you could actually boost global GDP, so the size of the entire world's economy, by as much as $5 trillion US. $5 trillion US, by the way, is the size of one Japan. So this is not small or insignificant. So the prize is very attractive if we can work to close this gap. What, however, is the reality? The reality is, as many of you know, that in the world, it's still very difficult for a lot of female entrepreneurs to get access, for instance, to capital, to money. On average, again, many of these studies are centered in the United States, but I think the average female-founded startup can raise, on average, about $935,000 to start up her company versus $2.1 million for the average male startup. This is despite the fact that, again, studies show that over a medium-term, 5 to 10-year time horizon, the female-owned businesses actually outperform the male ones. When you look at cumulative revenues, again, the BCG study shows this as well. So despite better performance, why isn't the money going to the winners is, of course, a question I think we're asking ourselves today, and we can discuss a little bit further. I'm just going to close and just mention a little bit. We've done some work at Goldman looking at some of the obstacles that women entrepreneurs face. They range from, again, access to capital, of course, but we also find, I think, maybe more than men, is the lack of a robust network or a community. People you can lean on for everything from technical expertise to advice. Am I doing something crazy? Give me some feedback. I think women have much less support networks than men do, and I think that's an area that maybe we want to discuss here in Japan. And of course, just knowledge of HR issues, like how do you hire, how do you find the good people, to how do you get rid of bad people. All of these issues, I think you can be a visionary and have a brilliant idea for a startup, but you do need some of this technical expertise as well. So I'd love to talk a little bit more of that maybe in the group later. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. We can get back to a couple of those topics a little bit later on, particularly the networking and the skills needed for different jobs. Next, Sungdam, could I ask you to give your presentation? Also, I think you have some interesting things to say about the specific job skills that are necessary for the future.
Yes. As a professor teaching in the university for 30 years, I've been observing my students. Each generation has a different opinion and the different values and different idea of jobs. And these days, they were talking about, one-person startup business. And instead of, having a job in big corporation, they haven't changed a lot in terms of attitude. the reason why as a sociologist, I've been observing this situation, the new era in the fourth industrial revolution period, our economic structure and the paradigm itself is very much different from the existing paradigm. I think existing paradigm of economic development or success is very much related, male-dominated, patriarchal. And everything, strong would be better than smaller, and the bigger one is better than smaller, and strong is better than soft. But if we observe the new era, future era, the emotional, caring, or soft, or people management, those become very important in terms of organization sector and policies and everywhere, actually. So since our topic of this G1 global conference is sustainable innovation for the disruptive times. So disruptive means, new challenge for rest of the labor forces, which is women, I think. So that if we use unused labor force so far, we can become, sustainable. We can have a kind of role to maintain the sustainable development. So I think women's labor force and women's idea and women's, skills or leadership hasn't been used quite a bit until now. So if we, have a challenge to the existing paradigm of economic development or success into the new paradigm, we might have some hope and a way to, overcome these kinds of disruptive times. Thank you.
May I ask you a little question here?
Yes.
You mentioned your students over a long career. Go back 30 years. What % of your students wanted to start companies, and what % of those people were men? And now today, what % want to start companies? What % are male or female?
Yeah, I started teaching in 1990s. That time, the marriage is must, but searching for the job is option. But nowadays, marriage is option, but having a job is a must. So they just give up everything, even children, in order to get a job. But existing situation, job situation or business sector, it's not really favorable for the women anyway. So especially I'm teaching in the university, women's university. We have a 130-year history of women's university. So all of our students become a leader, women leaders in our society, but they've been working in different sectors. But nowadays, they like to own their own business, and they can make. They can, they can show their leadership in everywhere. So instead of having a job in big organization, they try to utilize their creativity and their kind of emotional sensitivity, or try to make a sensitive idea or relations with the people. They prefer to have those kind of jobs.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the entrepreneurs. Enora, can I ask you, since you've worked in both the U.S. and in Japan, as an entrepreneur, what are your observations on the cultural differences and then in general?
Okay, hugely different, I have to say. I'm a mechanical engineer, so I'm kind of a nerd. But I have to say that it just kind of goes with the territory. Yes, a very different business style, of course. But I also have to say, I don't know if I can speak so much, Japan, just a different communication style, very much. But I think in my background as an engineer, basically, I always just took the attitude of, first of all, I'm an engineer, and second of all, I think because I didn't fit in, I was basically the only one or two women in an engineering school, and also in business as well, that people did not expect me to come up with the standard, I didn't fit in a box. So I think people were more open to hearing a different point of view. And I think that's also true in Japan. People view me as being different, so they're not surprised if I come up with a different approach. But also it's a matter of finding someone who's open to new ideas as well. I found to be most successful with young entrepreneurial-minded companies, two of which I'm advising now, that they seem to be more engaging in terms of looking at new ideas. Yeah.
Could you also tell us a little bit about how engaging with Japanese clients is different from engaging with American clients in your American startups?
Oh, yes. I think in Japan, we definitely need to spend a lot more time building our relationship first before we get into any kind of business. In America, it's much more, so I do a lot of work with looking at different manufacturing suppliers, because in product development, my job is to find a good partner to build a new product. And again, it just takes time. I keep meeting the supplier again and again until we finally start talking business, but we can't do it right away. Whereas in America, you get right to it.
So there's no particular kind of sake that works better or worse.
But yes, any kind is good. Lots of it.
Hey, thanks very much. Let's move on. Lynn, can I ask you to describe your observations on the topic?
Sure, thank you. So first of all, I think I'm really glad to see this title being not just Womenomics, but Womenomics and gender equality in entrepreneurship, because I believe personally that entrepreneurship really is the key. In Womenomics, when we talk about gender equality in this country, it's been traditionally sort of talking about large corporations or maybe women participation, female participation rate in politics. But I do know that so many of my peers for female in Japan are very talented, motivated people are suffering from this very stagnant or static corporate culture in Japanese corporations. I think, as the professor mentioned, large corporations are extremely slow to respond to changes, especially in Japan. And so I think, if you can have an entrepreneur, female entrepreneur, I think there are two reasons why I believe this is very important. A, if you're head of an organization, you're your own boss. You're your own boss, so you have a better work-life balance, where you actually have an ownership of your life. Number two, if the organization is headed by a woman, the organization tends to be very female-friendly workplace, and we tend to outperform too. So I think having heads and women entrepreneurs, heads of organizations, I think it would be a key. But as we know, there are a lot of obstacles, which I'm sure we will talk about later in this session. Thank you.
Thanks very much. じゃあ、Maiko-san, お願いします。You run probably the biggest business of anybody here.
We're labor-intensive industry. Thank you very much. My mother is an entrepreneur, so she's actually the person who founded this company called Poppins. So what we do is we're in the business of providing solutions for professional women in society. So we do childcare services, we do senior care services, and we also provide training and education. And on the topic of entrepreneurship and women, I think, as Lin-san was saying, also I really do believe there's a great fit, just because a lot of the life experiences that women go through, they actually reflect back and become a great business skill and add value to their career at the end of the day. And so, for example, raising children, for example, and if anyone's parents, I think you know that how much of multitasking, time management, motivating, praising, all those skills, I think, goes, hand in hand with the skills that you need once you become a business person. And also, like, I have an experience looking after my grandparents, and they teach you how to be respectful, to tolerate, to be patient, and then also, so it's an art of empathy, and that's something that you definitely need to have as a leader. And so, for me, I think these are sort of the life experiences on its own leads on to women being in entrepreneurship and for their career. And so the second point I just wanted to quickly make is what's then lacking? What can we do to promote those women going into entrepreneurship or to contribute to society? I think, unfortunately, there still continues to be a lack of support system in Japan. So the government is doing, making an effort trying to make sure that we offer basic services to working parents, but it's just not enough, and there's just not enough variety. And so I really believe that, it's not just for we need to make sure that there's a selection of different childcare, different senior care, so that there's a right choice for everybody, not just for full-time workers, not just for part-time workers, not just for freelancers, but also for entrepreneurs. And so that's really the creative solution that I think we need to have as a support system in order to promote this entrepreneurship in women. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks very much. We've had a number of different observations here. We've heard support system mentioned a couple times. We've heard characteristics of workers mentioned a couple times. If I may, let me hand out a little piece of paper to everyone based on Professor Cho's work. She mentioned something done by the World Economic Forum about the most important capabilities for employees in the fourth industrial revolution. So if you could hand these out just around, split them in two and hand them around. It's a kind of an interesting list. What they're saying here is that the skills that will become more important in job markets over time are the following things: complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, people management, coordination with others, emotional intelligence, judgment, decision-making, service orientation. We had a session on design thinking, which I think is very much about that. Negotiation, cognitive flexibility, things like that. So the question I want to raise with our panelists is, which of these skills do you think, first of all, are most important for entrepreneurs? I think I know what the answer is going to be, all of them. But also, are there natural advantages that women have in some of these skills for whatever reasons that give them an advantage? And particularly for Japan and Korea, are there skills that we could enhance to make the innate women's skills in entrepreneurship come out a little bit better? So who would like to start? What are the skills here that are most important? Nora, can I ask you to start?
Okay, well, I think since bottom line for me is I always, like I said, thought of myself as an engineer first rather than particularly focusing on being a woman. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important for women to, whatever role you want to play, to put that first, and you got to be passionate about it, and you have to believe in what you're doing. So I think that comes first. And also, I have to say, open-minded mentors. I had, of course, the management team above me also was all men. But I definitely sought out men that seemed to, want to understand me from a technical standpoint. So, so I think that's just the key point. Is just focus on your job, focus on what you're interested in.
Negotiating skills?
I think also, this, even being different, I still had to be very careful about how I approach things, being sensitive to that situation, and just manage that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I actually think very similarly that you need that passion. I see my mother as a role model, and she was a founder, and I think what she saw is I think the concept called user entrepreneurship. So she was actually the person who suffered in that situation, and so that was something she needed to solve, and solving that meant it was solving problems for the society. And so that sort of drove her, having her own experience, made her understand the gap in market, and then what the current system was lacking. And so I think that, as you were saying, passion, knowing what you need to solve and do is first and foremost. And then comes obviously all these different skills. And then I think particularly I see a lot in, I have 5,000 employees, and out of them I see there's a lot of people management or emotional intelligence. Those sort of skills are very abundant in what I see in female employee. And then I'm not sure, I don't have any statistics behind this, and so maybe
Professor
you can
Cho,
help me?
can you help us?
Well, not the statistics, but I think, besides all these 10 characteristics or 10 attributes, I think women tend to avoid conflict in terms of organization, and also women tend to look at the situation in order to make a decision. So I think if males tend to be unidirectional in terms of leading organization or corporate, whatever, business sector, but women tend to be, interplay and even networking communication. So, I mean, women tend to very sensitive to the different situation. So if I adopt, situational leadership or servant leadership in that context, women is much better in the sense, those kinds of situation. So I think the new generation entrepreneurship, we need those kind of, the attributes. Women tend to be better in terms of making harmony or avoiding conflict or even making peace. But in that sense, males may criticize women tend to just looking at their own family or their own individual well-to-do in terms of work and life balance. Their concern is narrow. But I think even males are same. But in our education, I think new generations tend to be very egocentric and not much concern about nation or family or collective community. But if we focus on some educational sector to expand their horizons, since we are living in a global era, if we look at some global atmosphere or economic situation, we can raise better, women leadership in this entrepreneurship and business sector as well. Thank you.
Thanks. You've used a very interesting phrase here about avoiding conflict. And in the business world, avoiding conflict is sometimes not possible. So what are the key lessons on avoiding conflict or engaging in conflict in a constructive way? I got one of the best lessons I ever got on that matter from the global head of research for Morgan Stanley years and years and years ago, a woman named Mary Clark. And I was having a troublesome employee, and I had to do something about this. And I wasn't really sure about how to do this. And so I asked about how to engage in conflict. Okay, should you just go ahead and do this, or do you need to step back? And she said, yes, you have to engage in conflict, but you have to do so in a constructive and sympathetic way. Okay, that was a great piece of advice. Kathy, can I ask you how you deal with this problem in your job?
Well, I don't do do it. Sorry. I don't do it very well, but I will say that as a manager of a team that spans Asia Pacific, so I have on my team people from mainland China, Australia, Korea, Singapore, and all parts in between, and males and females, although majority being male. I will say that in my 30-year career, I have definitely noticed. So when I'm growing up, right, all of us, I think, growing up think, oh, girls, boys, no difference whatsoever. All this stuff is nonsense. But as I am an adult and as I'm managing these people, I am beginning to realize there are absolutely some gender differences. So on this topic, for instance, we were talking earlier about how women versus men receive performance feedback. Yes. I know there's some managers here in this room. Again, being very generalistic here, but I tend to find that women, well, in my company, we have a 360-degree performance review, and you start with the good points, and then you end with the areas for improvement. The women tend to, no matter how amazing they are on the plus side, the only thing they remember from that meeting is the minus points. The guys, I'm sorry, there are a lot of guys here. You are really good at emphasizing those positive points, which is actually very helpful for those males' careers because it is a reflection of your confidence, right? Oh, you got some areas to work on, but you're really good at these 2 points, right? So I think that's an area where as managers of both men and women, we have to be very sensitive to. Same thing goes for, I think, women. We were talking at a session the other day about how a lot of women-owned businesses, especially in Japan, are very small scale, right? They're great, but they don't really get ever to a point of, really big, IPO and that kind of level. And one issue has been, I think, they're kind of, well, it's generating cash flow, and that's fine. And you try to ask a VC or somebody, who's willing to invest in your company, and they ask you, so how big are you willing to make your business? And you say, well, from here, the next 5 years, maybe 10% per year revenue growth. Whereas the guys would say, well, I'm going to go for $1 billion US, and I'm going to take this public. Will you join me, right, in my mission? So I'm just giving you that example because I think, again, a reflection of the female just inherent lower degree of self-confidence, and I think this is universal, not just unique to Japanese women, but what can we do as a society within companies to really help these women gain that confidence? I know there's no magic answer, but that's something I've just observed as a manager.
Thanks very much. You've brought up this issue of communication. And the example you gave is a wonderful one. And I learned about this notion of negative feedback as a key thing in a wonderful book called The Culture Map. Who's read The Culture Map? There's a Japanese translation. Ibunka no Rikairyoku, I think is the Japanese title for a wonderful book. And she actually, in her 8 axes of how to compare cultures, includes negative feedback as one of the elements. And it turns out it's very different across countries. What Kathy has just described is a typical American approach. Turns out if you're French, that's not how it works. They beat you over the head. Okay? So when a French person, this is an example in the book, a woman actually who was working in Chicago, her boss came in and gave her the 4 good things she's doing right, the 1 thing she's doing badly. She almost got fired because she thought all the wonderful things she was doing right were the right things. Okay, so this is a very cultural approach. Turns out the reason is simple. In French schools, they beat you over the head. The teachers never say anything nice. My brother had a French teacher once. He got a perfect score on the exam. She wouldn't give him a perfect score, and she took a point off because he didn't put 2 N's on the end of his name the way a real Frenchman would. Okay? So our assumptions about how to give negative feedback can also be very, very nationally oriented as well. So we got to watch out for the confluence of both national and gender differences here. On communication, I had this just amazing Deborah Tannen moment a couple weeks ago. I was inviting an economist to join me on a panel. She's a U.S. PhD trained economist, worked a lot in development economics. It was a panel about Asian development. And so I said, hey, you're perfect for this. Can you come be on the panel? This is the answer I got back from her. This topic is not something I know about, but it sounds fascinating, and I'm happy to learn more about it and participate in the panel discussion if you really think I'm appropriate. This goes directly to Kathy's point about lack of confidence. My wife told me once that there was some data saying that if you ask a woman to do a job, unless she's 95% confident, she won't say yes. A man, yeah, 50% is good enough. So these communication issues can be very, very difficult because the signal sent is not the same as the signal received. Could some of our entrepreneurs give us some background and comment on this? Inora.
Yeah, I think one comment I have is just that to make men feel comfortable in communicating with me, and that comes down to, whether you're going to have a kind of a conflict or an argument. Like in engineering terms, we'd argue about, the design of the product. And we have to be comfortable with that. And whatever your topic is like, it's not personal. It's, about getting the job done. And when people can feel comfortable with you doing that, then it opens up a lot of doors in terms of just being able to work together. I think that's the bottom line, is how do you work, enabling people to feel comfortable working together.
Lynn, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm a little hesitant to overgeneralize the gender difference because I have been, a female entrepreneur, and I have never sort of felt any different from my male entrepreneur, cohort. And I think things are changing. Things might be changing over generations too. I think in people who are in their 60s, 70s, male entrepreneurs they used to hire people who are like them. But if you look at our generation or younger, even male entrepreneurs are very open to diversity, paternity leaves, etc., etc. So I think the challenge here for Japan is not to try to overgeneralize, the gender gap, but rather, given that we are equally talented, what can society do? As Kathy said, and I think BCG report rightly points out that despite all the stats, some of the younger entrepreneurs that we both support are being discriminated against. When this is on the record, but I hate to say it. But for example, some of them shared a few examples with me or with us the other day that when she walks into the room with VC, venture capitalist, they would ask literally, and is your CFO a male? Do you have a male CFO? Like, you were in 2019, right? And interestingly, we had another lady from abroad, but that's not only in Japan. Right, and I'd be really interested in make sense observation, because BCG obviously published this report. What can the world, or not only in Japan, but can the system do, or the society do, to narrow that gap? It's a system error. I mean, yeah. Sorry.
Tasaka-san, do you want to answer that now?
I think data will be our friend, and I appreciate all the advertising. Thank you. But it's not my report. A bunch of colleagues put it together. I think, Kathy, one of the statistics you didn't talk about is how, back to you, Robert, what you said about self-presentation. One of the reasons why women don't get the funding is they say, well, I think revenue will be about 100 and profits will come in 3 years. Whereas, forgive me to generalize, the men say, we're going to make 3 billion and we're going to be profitable next year. And that underrepresentation, managing expectations, actually hurts us. So there's that side of the equation about what women can do to present themselves better. But, we're not the only ones. I think there are plenty of studies, and the numbers, in the end, it's about making money and doing great business. So to the extent we can continue telling these stories, and when we walk into a venture capitalist and says, where's your male CFO, you can say, well, where's your female CFO? And then we see what happens.
That's a good question. Thanks very much. I didn't realize that arithmetic was gender dependent. Okay, let me move on to one other thing. We didn't talk about it too much before, but invisible bias. We've mentioned some invisible bias here. HR rules, okay, can contain some invisible biases in them. There's one wonderful recent book called Invisible Women that goes through database after database after database. And it looks at the way the data is collected, the rules you get from that data, but it turns out the data was all created by men. And one example they had was snow removal in Sweden, okay? You wouldn't think that there would be a lot of gender bias in snow removal. Turns out there is. And the bias came in because when the decisions were made about where to remove the snow first, they were made by men who have certain transportation patterns. So they cleared the roads first, did the sidewalks later. Turns out men drive more than women in that part of Sweden. And so the women were left walking on snowy sidewalks, lots of accidents, et cetera, et cetera. So when they changed the rules to clear the sidewalks a little more earlier than the roads, all of a sudden, medical costs went down. So there can be unseen biases in the way we put rules together. Let me ask the entrepreneurs, from your experience, what rules of HR divisions include these invisible biases, and where could HR departments of themselves, don't wait for the government, where could HR departments improve their rules to eliminate these biases? Hard question. Lynn, you want to give it a try, or Michael-san, or?
I mean, I guess all of us, our organization, I don't know about your organization, but I think Michael's and our organizations are majority are female.
Yes.
So we don't actually have to tackle that problem. But I think you, Kathy-san, the other day told me about the interview, the orchestra interview.
Yes, blind audition.
Right. So I think that might be more relevant than.
Well, it's a very well. Here, I have my own. Well-known story, study of orchestras based in the United States, and I don't know, in the 60s it was 98% male musicians and very few women, but people assumed that maybe there was some bias going on when they were doing the auditions, because even though the women played just as well as the men, they were not getting rated that highly. And then so they started to try to neutralize that by putting the musicians behind a curtain, so you couldn't see if they were male or female. Although unfortunately somebody said the women wear high heel shoes, so you kind of hear it. But anyway. But the long story short is, over time, that gender imbalance of U.S. orchestras not completely corrected, but was improved dramatically when you said in this tone. So I'm not sure how your organizations would do interviews.
I think that's a key. I think some companies started to hide a gender in a resume. Started to do away with the photos that are very common in Japanese resumes. And I think in New York and some parts of the States, they're prohibited to ask the interviewees what their salary, previous salary was, because men tend to. Right, and then female men, we tend to underestimate ourselves. So I think there are some tips that we can, instill. But I think overall, for our organization, for example, I think it's more of an environment that we offer, that we provide. For example, we are as a school, we're dominantly a female organization, but at 5 o'clock sharp, all the phones go into voicemail. No one responds. And then our faculty members, male or female, take 2 months off, and then no one is expected to answer any email from us. I and the head of school have to sort of communicate, but the faculty are completely off for 2 months. And if you come to our cafeteria, you see baby strollers bought by our budget. Sort of public baby chairs, high chairs everywhere. So that sort of sends a signal that this is a very welcoming community for male, female, with children, with everyone. So I think, as much as we need to install those systems into HR system, but I think it's more of an environment or the message that our sort of organization can send as a whole.
Michael-san, do you have any observations on this?
Yeah, I think for us, and so I think we were talking earlier on that so most of our staff are on the grounds in nursery schools or in sort of looking after children. And so in that domain, I would say out of 5,000 people, there's probably like 95% or 7% women employee. But then once it becomes to headquarters, then it becomes sort of half and half. And then when it becomes the executive positions, then it's more male. And so you can kind of see that sort of the pool of people who are interested in different sort of different sectors of this industry. And so what we've tried to do really is, we've tried to change the hiring system by talking about different things. So even for the nursery teachers, now we have the biggest number of male nursery teachers as a group. And, they form groups, they have rugby team, they have all that sort of thing. So, we're trying to make it fun for them. And then also we have their career path, because until now, we didn't really have a set career sort of for the nursery teachers to go up. And so for them, for male, it was very sort of important to know, okay, so where am I going next? And so we're doing the opposite of sort of, attracting, how to attract male in that sort of space, because that is diversity. And, I think we're trying to do a creative solution for that.
Yeah, the Poppins rugby team. That's that's a big winner. We only have a couple minutes before Q&A, but let me ask one other thing before we go. A number of people mentioned support network creation, that you just don't have the support networks that male entrepreneurs do. What can Japan do to improve those support network creation? Any ideas?
May I add?
Please, yeah.
Well,
or Korea too.
I think especially, women entrepreneurs' role in northeastern countries are very important in terms of, looking at the developing countries' situation in the global economy. So I think the role to play the women leaders in this room may be very important in terms of creating, new market, or in terms of creating new organizational atmosphere, or even new economy. And the women's role is very important to play. So I think Japan, Korea, and China, and those, the Asian countries, especially, very important. And although it's a big challenge to all of us, but some of the women entrepreneurs so far, they become a role model for different countries, women entrepreneurs, and also the country's economy as a whole. So when we look at the global situation, global market in the future, I think the role play we have now, it's maybe contribute a lot to this disruptive times.
Okay, so more role models is the first element of getting the networks created.
Right.
What else?
Yeah, I think Kathy had mentioned funding and network. I think they go hand in hand. And I think there are many ways to approach this, but I think funding is one of them. And what we've been trying to do is to gather a group of female entrepreneurs and then put them in touch with a group of angel investors, male and female angel investors who believe that male and female entrepreneurs are equally talented. And they are the ones who don't ask questions like, so do you have a male CFO? So I think that's the first step, because I think, let's face it, funding is critical. Every entrepreneur needs funding, and if we can allow establish a path for them to access funding through, without threatening or a very biased, discriminating comments, I think that would encourage young generations.
I don't know if any of you are aware, but Governor Koike has led this kind of initiative to, at least for the Tokyo metropolitan area, to promote women entrepreneurs. I think it's called NEW, so Network for Entrepreneurial Women. Sasaki Kaori-san has been kind of leading, putting together this conference, but some of the ideas in there I think are very novel in terms of, for example, in terms of network creation and building a sense of community. One of the proposals, concrete proposals, of the last conference in, I think it was January, was to create like a portal site where you could go to everything from like successful examples like, you and you two, your own stories about not just your successes, but your failures, to very like mundane things like, where do I go for tax advice, or where do I go for HR evaluation, software, that kind of thing. And it sounds very sort of mundane, but I think something like that for Japan could actually be very powerful, just given, again, the lack of that horizontal connectivity. But
Thanks. The best lecture I ever heard on networking was by a colleague of mine in New York, a woman named Carla Harris. And she gave a wonderful lecture to our IT, Women in IT group. I managed to see the lecture. It was just stunningly good. But in the end, it came down to three things. You walk into a room with 100 people, you don't know any of them. What do? Okay? Show up, which is the first thing. Hook up, walk up to a few people. Doesn't have to be all 100. 2 or 3 will do. And then follow up. So what she would do is gather the cards, gather business cards, and then within a day, go back to a few of these people and say, gee, it was nice to meet you, et cetera, and she would get immense response. I've tried this, it really works. So that's another element in creating the network, is particularly the follow-up part. That's at least the advice from Carla. She has another piece of advice. You don't ask, you don't get. Time for Q&A. Let's have 3 questions at a time, and then we'll go to the next 3 if we have time to answer them. Tanaka-san, you held your hand up first.
Thank you very much. Nobuo Tanaka from the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. I have a question to Kathy and maybe Alan too. You have been in the financial sector for long, so the financial pressure of the investor will change the corporate behavior. For that, certainly, it is called gender lens investment is getting mainstreaming. I think for that, the disclosure of the gender balance or gender gap of each company is very important. And to promote that, my idea is gender lens and climate lens should sit together. For that, TCFD, Task Force for Climate Risk Disclosure, is a very interesting venue. So add gender gap parameters into the TCFD could enhance the investors to move to more climate mitigation as well as gender balance. What do you think, Kathy?
Oh yeah, 2 more. Okay. Next 2. Yes, please. Yep.
Thank you very much for the wonderful panel. My name is Ai Takano, and my question is, as an individual working in Japan in the workforce, so I feel very lucky that I have a full-time job, and I have a child, and I have a supportive husband. But as an individual, what can I do, or what is the most important thing that I can do to make the world more gender equal and give impact to the society? Thank you.
Third person? Yes, Jenny.
I was interested in the networking discussion, and I'm curious about what kind of social support there is outside of women entrepreneurs yourselves. But what does your family think? What do other people in Japanese society think? And do we need to be doing something about raising awareness? Is the first question. And the second is there any chance of introducing something like male champions for change? And maybe it already exists, but I don't hear about it, and I don't know who any of them are if they exist. But how could we do something like that?
Well, there's one right here, but yes. Start with Kathy.
Sure. So on Tanaka-san's question, I definitely agree that we could find a way to incorporate gender-based disclosures into the TCFD requirements. I would actually like to go even further. As you know, the Cabinet Office, the Naikakufu, a couple of years ago required all companies to disclose some kind of gender statistics and include some kind of targets. The problem with that mandate, which is better than nothing, but it's not standardized. So I, as a research analyst, if I'm trying to compare companies across different, industries, it's not standard. So it's very difficult to compare. So I would actually require standardization of the disclosure, but also, and we talked about this last night, is gender pay. This is a 4-letter word for many companies, I know, but if you look at some of the examples around the world, like Salesforce.com has done an brilliant job in this space. Please look at their website because they had document the whole story. Philip Morris International has also done this as well, and they get a third-party auditor to actually go in deep dive into the organizations to make sure that there's no gaps. Again, very hard hurdle, I know, for a lot of companies, but I think gender pay disclosure is a very big first step. And while I'm at it, Male Champions of Change, the former Gender Equality Minister Mori, Masako Mori, she started this because I introduced her to Elizabeth, the Australian woman. Yes, it has taken off, but it's not exactly the same as the Australian original. So I think there needs to be more. You're a champion, but you need to like pull the rest of your peer group, right? People say like in some, I think in Australia, if you're invited to a panel, if you're a male CEO and the whole panel is male, you refuse to participate unless they add a female. You know, things like this that kind of put the pedal to the metal. I think they could do a little bit more enforcement here.
Lynn, do you want to add?
Yeah, can I take Isen's question about
Yes.
what can individuals do? I think I would say don't be afraid to push boundaries in every single way. And there is a strong tailwind for women in Japan. And for example, when I was serving on one of the governmental sort of committees, there was a Minister of Education in the room for the meeting. But I raised 2 kids. I live in Karuizawa, and then, and I said, "Can I join via Skype?" The ministry people were like, "What?" This was 5 years ago, but this actually became the first ever sort of meeting, online meeting with the minister in a meeting. So I think the key here is do it with a smile. Don't fight against and say like this is my right. Like I have this every right to do. That doesn't help. As long as you understand the inconvenience that you may be causing, but you very ask politely, the doors will open. Why are you laughing?
May I add just one more point? Even if you are, employees or entrepreneurs, we have to think of social responsibility on one hand. I think when you create some kind of social impact, whatever you are doing, that gets lots of support these days. Nowadays we are SNS period. We have a lot of technology. We can make an influence by ourselves. So I think using our all available technology, what kind of values you create, social values, and that reaches to the social responsibility as leaders of the society. That make some kind of support from everywhere, I think.
Very good.
Okay, my quick comment was for actually both of your questions is be a mentor. For both men and women, because you serve as a role model in both ways, and I think that would be good.
One other thing, there's a male champion who is the president of the very large retailer Aeon, and he established a policy in his firm. He went to his management and said, "Guys, look, half of our clients are women. There will no longer be any meetings in our firm where there are no women present. If there's no women, there's no meeting, period." And so he enforced that in his firm, and he's very happy with the outcome.
Or the number of meetings went way down.
That's also a benefit. That's a big benefit. Yeah, productivity went straight up, as you say. Okay, can we get 3 more questions? Yes.
Thank you for the panel. My name is Ken Goito from D4V. Today, we have so many male participants here, but this panel, only few % of male here. So what should we, the men and males here, do first from after this panel?
Okay, good question. Next question, is there another one before we go to that? Yes, here. Thank you.
Okay, this list is, these are the soft skills that are, in general, are associated for being a female. So I would like to ask all the panels, what would you advise us women that we all have all these soft skills, but at the same time, like sometimes companies are looking for people who have these soft skills, and that's the only time they think we need a woman for this position. But well, what would you advise with to us women, that it not just we have the soft skills that men may not have, but we could also be tough as them, so that, like, for example, there is one job that don't necessarily look for whether it's for a female or a male. So what would you advise to that individual who has that certain soft skills like empathetic and EQ? So my question is, what would you advise like a female, a woman who is aiming for a position that required that the person that we have to put in this position has to has that soft skills, specifically be empathetic, because sometimes we are labeled as the gender who are more empathetic than men. So the tendency is that, okay, we need a woman or women for this type of position. So how is it that for a certain position that will need both the soft skills and being tough as men, like self-confidence and how they make their decisions, what advice would you give for women to be like equal to
So
men?
how to
when it
acquire the
comes
other
to-
skills.
Yeah, in terms of the skills that we have.
Okay. That's three, but maybe we can take a few more and then just get general answers here.
Hi, Hala Tashkendi from Arab News. So I have a question. I come from a rather conservative country, let's say. I come from Saudi Arabia, and where women's rights, let's say, maybe don't have the best reputation. My question to the entire panel is, what would you say to a woman who experiences internalized misogyny, let's say, who doesn't believe in gender equality? What response do you have to a woman who thinks, I'm not equal to a man? How would you respond to that?
That's a great question. Thank you. One more over here, or two more? Okay, real quick. 15 seconds each.
Challenges. Jackie Steele from the Graduate Law School, Nagoya University, but also founder of diversity and inclusion consulting firm Enjoy. I guess I'm interested in following up on the comments where we're trying to move away from women think this way, men think this way, sort of diversifying our understanding that the feminine and the masculine, of course, are a spectrum that's in every human being, and we're harnessing them in different ways, and we've been socialized along that pathway to generate these tendencies. So what I'd love to hear, I mean, for me, in terms of the strategy to diversify not only our corporate policies and our corporate strategies around talent, but also diversifying the models of what we consider to be leadership, about what we consider to be excellence, about what we consider to be soft skills versus the hard skills. How are we feminizing and masculizing those concepts, and how do we unlearn and deconstruct that so that we can actually harness that not all men are alike. There are many very feminine men who have wonderful soft skills, and I'm sure that Poppins is harnessing their caregiving capacity and empathy. So I'd love to hear from your companies, how are you diversifying your leadership models?
Okay, maybe one last, real quick.
I'm Senna from Recruit, and to increase the male allies, we usually talk about what we should do at work. But if, well, do you happen to have any advice on what we should be doing at home?
Okay, very good, thanks. We have 1 minute left. Can I ask somebody to raise their hand? Lynn, you look like you want to answer. No? Okay. Any reactions to these questions?
Okay, my basic reaction is regarding especially women feelings and things. I think bottom line is business is results oriented. So any kind of position you want to go for, what you want to do, you have to, again, believe that you can do the job, and don't think about if it's for a man or a woman. It's what are the results that are expected, or what is the type of work that's expected.
Mm-hmm. Kathy?
I'll go for the advice at home. This is after 28 years of marriage. I've learned one thing, and that is don't criticize your spouse on doing a bad job with anything, washing dishes or doing the laundry. I used to do that, and my husband got really mad and stopped doing it, and that was very unhelpful. So I learned to actually pour on the praise. Some of you know my husband, so please don't tell him afterwards. Pour on the praise, like, oh my God, thank you so much for doing whatever. And it wasn't really a good job, but it doesn't matter because he did it. He's doing it. And so, yeah, that's my little piece of.
Michael?
Yeah, just to quickly touch upon that. So I think for me, I tend to react a little bit harshly to this trying to be equal. I don't really know if we need to be equal. I think it needs to be fair, maybe, but equal is not really the word that I would go for. So what I tell our children or the nursery teachers are, it's just look at the individual. It's not gender bias. Don't look at nationalities, don't look at genders. Look at the individual and the individual talent within, so the diversity within children, right? I mean, I think that's what really makes it, and that's what we're going for the future, that it's not something that's biased on those categories. Per se. So.
Okay. Thanks very much. We're a minute over, so I'm going to get killed if I don't stop this right now. But let me thank the panelists and thank everyone for joining us. And we can continue the discussion outside. Finally, on the back side, there is a reading list of interesting books that you might enjoy. Thank you very much.